Bend over rows aren't optimal. There's too much erector spine and internal bracing, thereby reducing force production of the upper back musculature and latissimus dorsi. A smarter option is favoring chest supported rows to elicit the greatest motor unit recruitment. Although these arguments aren't wrong, no one ever has to do a bend over row for hypertrophy. The reductionist nature is a big problem. In today's video, I'll be providing a strong case for favoring bend over rows for certain kinds of lifters, which also depends how you program. First thing I want to bring this discussion back to is the theme of blending, because that's central. See, the whole point of horizontal pulling is to work on your thickness and even width, depending how you manipulate your arm path. It is supposed to be an upper body exercise, hence programming bend over rows on your upper days. But the problem lies in the fact that we are stabilizing our own torso by being bent forward at a typical 45-degree angle, and if you want even more range of motion, getting lower than that. And as a result, the spinal erectors are experiencing constant tension. You must maintain that tightness and brace as hard as possible, which does in fact reduce force output, but that's only limited to how much you can brace. And then the other thing is, if you have a lower body workout for the next day, in which you are going to do a lot of axial loaded exercises like squats and deadlifts, big heavy compounds that generate tons of systemic fatigue and also have a requirement for strong spinal erectors, then it's absolutely correct that bend over rowing the day before will interfere with that. You're simply not recovered. Now, if you would give yourself a day in between, 48 hours, 72 tops, then this would not even be an issue. But most people run an upper lower, push-pull legs, and even your select body part splits. There's always going to be an effect where your lower back is an issue. And that's what these guys have a problem with, because we're not rowing for the lower back. You can always isolate it right after. This makes sense. And when I was working up to my 507 squat, I took out all bend over rows. It was purely machine work. I did not want to load my lower back any further because I simply could not tolerate the additional workload. So why am I now going to suggest it? Well, there's some contradictions that are super obvious. The optimal crew doesn't even do these big motions. They always talk trash about the bar back squat, saying that it's unstable, there's too much coordination. They favor hack squats. And when it comes to deadlifts, they're always picking the more out of less weight variations. And they're staying in their active hinging range, which actually requires less spinal erector strength. And I think that's the best part. But for the squatting, or favoring tons of machines in general, let's keep it real. The majority of their training is not heavily biased towards the spinal erectors. In other words, they have that recovery reserve available. If you're doing hack squats, leg press, Bulgarian split squats, leg extension, leg curl, that is a fine workout. Don't get me wrong, but you can hit bend over rows the next day or even the day before. It wouldn't have affected you. See, that's where we have to really bring it back to the actual subject. Blending, not elimination. If I was skipping my legs, if I did zero work whatsoever, you bet my ass I would be doing bend over rows. That combined with more good mornings and reverse hyperextensions, I would actually up the volume for the lower back. So it depends what your leg days look like, in addition to the frequency of it. If you're running a bro split or even a customized upper lower split in which you're only training your legs once a week, which is totally doable for hypertrophy, this is what the meta-analyses are starting to show. So if you do push, pull, legs off, upper arms off, repeat. In other words, you're skipping that second leg day. Guess what? On the second upper day, you can do bend over rows in addition to standing overhead presses. See, all the exercises that were criticized for having too much of a bracing component are now eligible for coming back into your program. You can resurrect the basics. And personally, I've been doing this to a certain extent. So that's the number one flaw with this argument. It doesn't account for your exercise selection and training frequency and how you split up the workouts, the rest in between, when you're hitting your spinal erectors hard versus really trying to focus on the upper back. Such a contradiction. But I'm just getting started. The next thing I want to talk about is strength classification. Who's being targeted and saying, don't do bent over rows? Mostly beginners, right? Yet, these are the exact kinds of lifters that probably need bent over rows the most. They are the exception that can basically tolerate anything. I'm talking about linear progression, 5 pounds added to a big compound movement, whether it be a squat or deadlift, every workout for the next 6 months at a bare minimum. High frequency, 5x5, 3x5, 3 to 4 times a week. You are trashing yourself with axial loaded motions plus doing bent over rows. It's almost like you're on roids for this very short duration of time. Yet, those novices can't handle bent over rows, even though when the internet came out, we had all these novice programs out there, right? Basically just recommending barbell rows. And everyone did them without complaints. Everyone got to intermediate. No one was saying, oh, my spinal erectors. But now it's a problem. In the last year and a half, 3 years tops, I call serious BS. As long as the novice is using correct form, it is the upper back that's going to be the limiting factor. Now, is it true that force production is not as high as it could be? Yeah, but in general, that applies to novices. You haven't accessed your full nervous system yet. That's why it's not even recommended to do a lot of singles. Even triples. You haven't actualized your potential and you're still learning the motions. There's a lot of neurological gains to be sought out for, in addition to just learning the basic movement patterns. So much of the gains you're experiencing is just getting more adept, experienced, skillful. So that in itself is easier on recovery, not to mention the absolute loads. No one who's rowing 95 pounds needs to worry about the optimal row. You don't even have a back. And with what I've seen over the years, even going up to a plate is totally doable. It's really around the 185 mark, maybe 165 at the lowest, where we start to see form degradation and guys mentioning the lower back even being an issue. But before that, for most of your first year, you can milk the living hell out of bent over rows. And that's how it's always been. Therefore, the initial argument only applies to intermediate lifters. They will absolutely suffer from this exercise because now they're in that transition phase where the upper back can handle more work, but their spinal erectors aren't on that level yet. So when you're rowing between 185 and 225 for the first time, yeah, it can be awkward. And that's why you'll see a lot of guys favoring cheat rows and pen lay rows, which I don't believe is optimal, except for factoring in the weight of stretch overload. And also free weighted rows in general don't have the best resistance profile. So that's why people try to even it out by maneuvering their torso. And guys will even do this on chest supported rows, by the way, unless they're using a selected machine that inverted the strength curve. Those are very rare. I know Prime Fitness sells them. Your gym probably doesn't have them, but if you do, make use of it. It's freaking money. So that explains it. And it's also why I came up with the standard of having your RDL be 150 to 200 pounds more than your bent over row. It's to accommodate for this strength discrepancy between the lower and upper body. And so when someone acquires an advanced lower body, what happens when they then go back to bent over rows? They have smooth progress again. And personally, after working up to a 507 squat and 600 pound deadlift, I can tell you that being completely bent forward with 225 is not a problem whatsoever for my lower back. It just isn't. Like I could do 275 for 3x10 on a good morning. My spinal erectors have become so bulletproof that this isn't even a concern. So what I'm saying is there's two kinds of lifters that will benefit from bent over rows. The complete beginner and the experienced advanced or elite lifter. It's the two polar opposites. So it's that ugly duckling. It's that guy right in the middle. The transition phase. You're growing out your hair. It looks ugly. Those dudes should be very careful with bent over rows. But for everyone else, I think it's fair game. And I think that's why the old school greats didn't have issues with progressive overload for bent over rows. Like even Arnold will say it, and he didn't get everything right, but bodybuilders oftentimes lack that thickness today. Not all of them, but many. Whereas in the golden age, you never saw this weakness. No one was doing chest supported rows. They were doing deficit T-bar rows, heavy weight, sometimes around the spine. Very little back injuries, no complaints. Everything was perfect. Then you go back in time throughout all these eras. Bronze, silver, golden. Bent over rows were a staple of all kinds. Now, it's obviously not the only thing they did. They performed pull-ups and dumbbell rows and sometimes little cable stuff, but it was certainly not with chest support. Now, again, I'm not saying they had everything right back then. Chest supported rows absolutely have their advantage, and I still favor them most of the time. But it doesn't change the fact that you can build a world-class super elite back without ever doing that. And it certainly wasn't a problem for the old school greats. So you really got to ask how much of a difference it makes in terms of force production and spinal erectors. Like, how much are they actually limiting you? And what if you use a lighter weight? Which brings me on to my next point. What if you just drop your ego and use flawless form, Dr. Mike style? I'm talking about deficit bent over rows, in which you're standing on a box, torso is completely bent forward, no raising whatsoever. You're getting a maximum stretch at the bottom, full squeeze at the top, likely holding for a second or two, and then controlling that negative, keeping everything locked in. You do that, 90% of you won't even touch 185. Say hello to 135 once more. If IFBB pros who are even twice the size of you or me are doing that, and don't just call out their enhanced status, they can row 3 plates and above if they use the cheat form style. They're certainly not weak, okay? They're just trying to get the most out of least weight. So if they can do a brutal punishing back workout, and it's not staged, it's not fake, it's legit, you're actually making the exercise harder, then what's that going to do for you? I wouldn't be surprised if you're back doing 95 pounds. And you know what? That would be a great thing from a stimulus to fatigue standpoint. And I can sure as hell promise you that spinal erectors aren't going to be the issue. Because if they are, I mean, you're the issue at that point. You got to really work on correcting it. So I just find it funny how we're always talking about the overloading variations. Even the motion itself gets criticized for being too restrictive, because that's another dumb argument. Oh, you can't fully contract because the barbell is restricting you. You can't wrap around the body, utilize the rib cage. Bro, you get adjustable handles, you wrap them around the bar, and now you can rotate, get a complete squeeze. So that's not even an argument. It's a zero, what you're saying. All you have to do is use proper form, drop your ego, listen to me. I was one of the biggest ego lifters in this game. I can't go heavy on deficit bent over rows. Or even if I don't do it in that style where I'm standing on something, if I hit higher repetitions of 15 to 20, controlled, proper, doing it for hypertrophy, then everything's going to be fine. And this goes for a lot of motions that have a high stability requirement, by the way. It's why we favor high repetitions with gymnastic rings and even standing overhead press. That's why I got better gains doing sets of 10 versus sets of 3 to 5. Now I understand why. If you know there's a con, you up the reps. In terms of proximity to failure, the muscle gains are equated. Then as a little bonus point, I'll mention this. Where's the love for all my strength athletes? If you're a powerlifter or strongman competitor, there's nothing wrong with bending forward unless it hurts your recovery, as I mentioned previously. But provided you can handle it, we can argue it's a very specific motion because you're rowing while simultaneously engaging the hips. There is some movement going on there. You are hinging and rowing. That adds an element of specificity. And it's no coincidence that many GOATs are doing bent over rows for deadlift carryover specifically. Just look at Caleb Willem. Besides Good Mornings, he said this was the second best deadlift accessory. I think that tells the entire story. Not to mention, those who follow his advice got great results. Myself included. Me switching over to chest support is only a recent thing. Like, I got back into inverted rows in 2020 to reduce lower back involvement, and then it just progressed from there on. I started doing it weighted. I started experimenting with the ghetto rows. All kinds of variations that you see me talk about numerous times on this channel, but throughout that entire journey, it wasn't an issue. That's all I'm trying to say. There's a way to program everything. There's no such thing as a bad movement. Always be careful with guys who say there is. And although I love chest supported rows to death, I do think they're generally superior. This is the way moving forward. To then conclude the basic time-proven bent over row is not good is a huge stretch. And I don't support that position. Some of you need to stop because I just gave you plenty of examples in which incorporating them is absolutely worth your time. So you take that how you will. Hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you agree or disagree on bent over rows. Are they overrated or not? Let me know. And I'll talk to you all next time.